Have you ever wondered what could ignite a war amongst brothers, turning a nation against itself? The American Civil War, a conflict that tore the fabric of a young nation, was not a spontaneous event. It was the culmination of years of tension, disagreements, and unresolved issues. Today we're going to delve into the roots of this conflict, the causes that set brother against brother and state against state. Picture this: two halves of a country, the North and the South, each with its unique economic and social fabric. The North rapidly industrializing, its economy based on manufacturing and commerce, and a society leaning towards progressive social ideals. The South, on the other hand, adhered to an agrarian lifestyle. Its economy heavily reliant on a labor-intensive agricultural system, primarily cotton, which was underpinned by the institution of slavery. These economic and social differences between the North and the South were the backdrop against which the drama of the Civil War unfolded. But there was more to it than just regional differences. At the heart of the conflict was the issue of states' rights versus federal rights. The Southern states championed the idea of states' rights, arguing that each state should have the power to make its own decisions, particularly concerning the contentious issue of slavery. And then there was the elephant in the room: slavery itself. The North and South had long been at odds over this brutal institution. While many in the North sought its abolition, viewing it as morally abhorrent, the South defended it as a necessary evil for their economy. The controversy over slavery became more pronounced as the nation expanded westward, with each new state's stance on slavery tipping the balance of power in Congress. These causes were like slow-burning fuses, igniting the powder keg of resentment and discord that eventually exploded into the Civil War. As the nation expanded, so did these divisive issues, pushing the United States into a brutal conflict. In 1861, shots fired at Fort Sumter ignited the spark of conflict that would consume the nation. The American Civil War, a brutal and bloody four-year battle, was marked by significant turning points and battles that would forever shape the course of history. Let's cast our minds back to the Battle of Gettysburg, a three-day confrontation that would become the war's bloodiest engagement. It was here that Union forces under the command of General George Meade clashed with Confederate troops led by General Robert E. Lee. This battle, with its staggering loss of over 50,000 lives, marked a significant turning point. The Confederates were forced into a retreat, their hopes of a northern invasion dashed. But it wasn't just on land that decisive battles were fought. The Civil War saw the advent of naval warfare that would change the dynamics of conflict. Ironclad warships like the USS Monitor and CSS Virginia clashed in the waters, their iron hulls making them virtually impervious to traditional cannon fire. This marked a pivotal moment in naval warfare, signaling the end of the era of wooden warships. Amidst the unfolding chaos and carnage, one event stands out as a beacon of hope: the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced this landmark decision, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. This not only gave the war a moral dimension, but also strategically undermined the Confederate workforce. However, the path to victory was not straightforward. The Confederates, despite being outmanned and outgunned, held their ground with tenacity. Their initial victories, such as the First Battle of Bull Run, gave them a glimmer of hope. They fought with a fierce determination, fueled by their belief in states' rights and their way of life. But as the years wore on, the tide began to turn. The Union's superior resources, along with key strategic victories, gradually wore down the Confederate resistance. The war was far from over, but the scales were starting to tip. Despite initial Confederate victories, the tide of war soon turned in favor of the Union. The stage was set for the final act of this tragic and transformative conflict. In every war, there are individuals who stand out, shaping the course of history with their actions. The American Civil War was no exception, with leaders and heroes emerging from the chaos to guide the nation through its darkest hours. Take Abraham Lincoln, for instance. The 16th President of the United States, Lincoln's steadfast resolve and unwavering commitment to the Union held the nation together during its most divisive and destructive period. His Emancipation Proclamation in 1862 changed the course of the war and the nation, transforming the fight into a struggle for human freedom. Then there's Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general whose military genius and gallantry won him respect from both sides of the conflict. Despite his personal conviction that slavery was morally wrong, his loyalty to his home state of Virginia led him to fight for the South. His surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865 marked the end of the devastating war. On the Union side, Ulysses S. Grant proved to be an effective and determined leader. His relentless campaign against the Confederacy earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrender Grant. His leadership played a pivotal role in the Union's victory, and his magnanimity toward the defeated South during the Reconstruction period helped heal the wounds of the war. And we cannot forget Harriet Tubman. A former slave herself, Tubman's courageous work on the Underground Railroad saved countless lives. During the war, she served as a nurse, a cook, and a spy for the Union, proving that heroes come in many forms. These figures, each with their own convictions and courage, played instrumental roles in the Civil War. Their decisions and actions, whether on the battlefield or in the halls of power, shaped the war and its outcomes. Their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs form an integral part of the narrative of the American Civil War. These figures, on both sides of the conflict, left indelible marks on the fabric of American history. In 1865, the guns fell silent, but the echoes of the Civil War reverberated through the years. The end of the war was marked at a humble location in Virginia, the Appomattox Courthouse. The Southern general, Robert E. Lee, surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, the Union general, thus marking the end of the Confederacy and the American Civil War. It was a moment that embodied relief, sadness, triumph, and despair all at once. But the nation's struggle was far from over. Just 5 days after the surrender at Appomattox, a moment of joy turned into a national tragedy. President Abraham Lincoln, the man who had led the nation through this tumultuous period, was assassinated. His death sent shockwaves through a country already reeling from the devastation of war. Lincoln's vision of a just and lasting peace was left in the hands of his successors. The period that followed, known as Reconstruction, was a time of significant political and social change. The nation grappled with the challenge of reintegrating the southern states and determining the status of African Americans. It was a time of hope, with the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, abolishing slavery, granting equal protection under the law, and extending voting rights. Yet it was also a time of ongoing struggle, as the nation grappled with deep-seated racial and regional tensions. The end of the Civil War brought freedom and legal equality for African Americans, but it did not bring full social or economic equality. The struggle for civil rights would continue for another century and beyond. The war also left a lasting legacy on the American psyche, shaping national identity, deepening regional identities, and forever altering the nation's trajectory. The Civil War was not just a 4-year conflict. It was a crucible that tested and transformed the United States. Its end marked not a return to the status quo, but the birth of a new, albeit imperfect, era. The Civil War ended, but its impact forever changed the United States. Now, over a century later, the Civil War remains a defining chapter in American history. This war was not just a clash of armies on dusty battlefields. It was a battle for the very soul of a nation, a struggle that left an indelible mark on the American landscape. The Civil War brought about profound changes that continue to shape America. The most obvious of these, of course, is the abolition of slavery. This war, fought largely over the question of human bondage, ended with the total abolition of this inhumane practice. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in late 1865, made sure of that. This marked a significant step towards the ideal of equality that the United States espouses. But the effects of the war went beyond the eradication of slavery. The war also fundamentally transformed the relationship between the states and the federal government. Before the war, the United States was often referred to in the plural, the United States are. After the war, it became the United States is. The balance of power shifted decisively from the states to the federal government, forever changing the nature of the American political system. The war also left a deep cultural imprint, especially in the South. The concept of the lost cause, a romanticized vision of the antebellum South and its struggle during the war, took root in Southern society and culture. This narrative, while often obscuring the true causes and effects of the war, remains a potent force in Southern identity to this day. On the other side, in the North, the war inspired a sense of unity and national purpose. It was seen as a necessary struggle to preserve the Union, and in doing so, uphold the principles upon which the nation was founded. The Civil War, a conflict that tore the nation apart, ultimately shaped the United States into the nation it is today. This war, with all its bloodshed and turmoil, left a legacy of change and transformation that still echoes through the centuries.